welcome to another episode on Awaz-e-Haqiqat, which also translates to the voice of truth. I'm your host, Chris Malika Bhadra, and depending on whichever part of the world you're listening to me from, today I will be rather talking about fashion, the evolution of fashion, the meaning of fashion in the South Asian diaspora. And I'm joined by a very, very interesting and a pivotal guest who's joining me from Melbourne as well. I'm joined by the vision owner and the founder of the brand called Mastani, Kudrat Makkar. So Kudrat is the founder and the creative director of this brand. Through Mastani, she wants to take the customers to a journey into the world of the hands that made it and the culture that shaped it. By using handmade traditional techniques, which are inherited by artisans from the ancestors, Kudrat's aim is to preserve and revitalize her Indian culture heritage through the modern lens of Mastani. And this year, she also made her debut at the Australian Fashion Week. So I'm super, super excited to be talking to her on my podcast. On that note, a very good evening, Kudrat. How are you doing?
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast tonight.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. Congratulations for your debut on the Australian Fashion Week. So this conversation is kind of dedicated to your debut and all things that surround fashion, right? First things first, Kudrat, for laymen like us, for me, how would you define fashion in the 21st century?
Oh, it's a very interesting question. I think for me, growing up, I, was sort of guided by my mom's fashion, I think, as any little girl would.
Yeah.
But then I think traveling around the world sort of opened up my eyes and, very well traveled during my childhood. I sort of intercepted fashion in many different ways. I don't follow the guide rules, and I think in the 21st century, in a good way, the young generation is very smart, very intelligent, very careful about what they're putting out in the world, also about their environment. I think a large chunk of the new generation is being very mindful of what they're buying and what they're wearing, and that sort of dictates the fashion for them.
Right.
I never went to a fashion school, so for me as well to sort of follow those rules have been a bit difficult because I take a lot of inspiration from history and architecture, that being my background. I think anything is fashion in 21st century. As long as it sits well with you, and it makes sense to you. I think no one is here to judge anyone. So I definitely believe that as long as it's a quality made piece, and you're not affecting or harming anyone, anything is fashion.
Absolutely. And I think for me, I would take it as whatever you're comfortable and whatever is sustainable these days.
Correct.
Thanks for opening up the conversation that way, Kudrat. But now on to you. So it took you 6 years to make your debut at the Oz Fashion Week. Now, as a South Asian and woman of color, what are some of the major challenges that you might have faced in your journey in that overseas fashion world around you?
Yeah, I think Australian Fashion Week in itself was sort of a big leap for me. But starting as a designer, coming from a South Asian background, someone with no background in fashion, and sort of breaking that sort of glass ceiling, as you say. I think for me, my sort of foremost reason for doing this was there was a purpose behind it. I really just did not want it to have a fashion brand because it is something very fun, or I just wanted to be in fashion. I think every girl growing up or every youngster you talk to, women love fashion. But I think my purpose was the connection between India and Australia. I think for me, it was purely an excuse for me to travel back to the country. And doing something very meaningful and in a way giving back. I was at that stage I thought, okay, what can I do to sort of bridge that gap and to that market which I felt was really missing in Australia, especially being traveled to the UK, US. I felt there was a lot more presence. There was a lot more South Asians, Indians, in especially the fashion field. And I found that there's so much artistry and so much beauty in all the cultural and heritage we have, how do we sort of interpret and bring it to the Australian market?
Mm.
It's been quite a journey. I think I was very focused, and I knew what I really wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. I think the purpose was very clear. So
Yeah.
from day one, I knew what I wanted the brand to look like. I think it's in any field, whatever you do. I think when you really have the right intention and the right ideas, and you sort of work towards it, because even coming from India, for me to work with the artisans and the different states within India, as you imagine, and
Yeah.
there's so many different languages we all speak. So when I went, I'm like, oh, it should be fine. Kitna mushkil ho sakta hai? It can't be that hard. But then when I went, and the first place I went to was Bhuj, out of all the places to work with block printing and marble printing. And oh my God, I couldn't understand a word, because the language was as foreign to me as anyone else, as any Australian would. So I did sort of do my research, and I had to get help locally, and I did all of that. So it has been a journey. I have been accepted really well by the clients, and I would say with open hands by the Australians, which I think it's a big thing in itself, because I think I made sure that I do give them the quality, I do give them the what they have, they want to have, rather than any other sort of run of the mill piece.
Right.
So they understood the story. I think telling that story for me was very important. They understood the purpose of the brand. Obviously, it is, we had COVID in between as well. So let's not forget that was sort of a time where, we had just started out almost. We were 1 year in, we were sort of finding our rhythm and momentum. And then that's it. COVID happened, especially hit in Melbourne really
Yeah.
badly. And we were basically shut close for 2 years. But we still had that niche clientele, that clientele who, loves Mastani. We would have people knocking on the door and wanting to try out things, and we would actually, there's a lot of local clientele. We are based out of Armadale, who would, walk in, and sort of, we were not allowed to serve them or let them try on things, and we would actually give them things, keep their credit cards, they'd come back. And so, we did all of that because we were not technically
Right.
allowed to serve
Right.
any customers. So yeah, 6 years, and then Australian Fashion Week, it is an event where you really are invited. So I think for me it was a big deal. Especially I think for me, portraying my home country was
Yeah.
a big thing, and I really wanted to do it in a very good way, so that everyone who knows me, who doesn't know me, the community, everyone's proud of it. So yeah, it's been
Absolutely.
a wonderful journey.
Absolutely. And I think before I forget, Kudrat, you being out there, you have opened the doors for so many other women of color who want to
I
do.
think that was I think, to be honest, purposely, I behind all the facade, whatever we do, yes, it is a business, and I run it as a business, and I'm very creative. But I think for me, I think I have a daughter who's 4 years old. So I think for me to be that someone that it's I always think it's like an history, part of history, and we are a very young migrant sort of the Indian community.
Yeah.
As much as we think we are a lot of us here, we are still quite young in this country. The majority of the migration only happened in early 2000 or
Yeah.
90s.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's unlike the UK or
Right.
US, where people have been there for more than
So
50 years,
long.
60 years, or so long. So I think for me, opening up that door and saying, yes, if I can do it. I've only been in Australia for, I came here in 2008, 9, I think, 9ish, 9, 10, around there. So I've only been here for what, 13, 14 years. If I can do it, especially my kids' generation, they're born here, they're getting brought up here, they have that sort of that pedestal set for them, so why can't you? So I'm hoping, and I think that's something I really want to watch. I would really want to see a lot more Indian background or South Asian background, sort of girls, boys, coming out. And in this, we are all coming from traditional Indian families. We are a lot of doctors, there's a lot of IT, there's a lot of but I think we really want more. There's some beautiful artists who work, and but I really hope that this gives everyone that that push, that it is possible.
Beautiful. Thanks, Kudrat. I totally agree. Totally agree to that. But now I want to talk to you about media, right? As a South Asian country, back in India, media plays a huge role, and we're often blinded by the perceptions that media kind of throws on us as a perfect body, zero figure, and all of that. How does the media impact the perspective of fashion in today's youth? What have you seen in your experience?
Like I said, I think things are changing. I think, unfortunately, when I was sort of growing up, probably when I was in my teenage years, it was really with Kareena Kapoor going size zero, back in India for her movie. And,
Right,
it was that whole thing, everybody wanted to, go on the crash diets. And
right.
but I think it's sort of like gone, it's gone in a way that if I think about myself now in my 30s, or my sort of younger friends or younger cousins in their teens or their 20s, like I said, these kids are very smart.
Mhm.
They really look after their mental health on top of anything else, which I think is something you can get really pressurized, especially with social media, especially with what you see. The good thing is all these kids know that whatever we see is probably not even real. There's filters, there's all sort of body changing, whereas it's probably not even the real body. So I think with moving times, as much as I feel there's so much of overload with so much information for our kids and our younger generation, I hope they're smart enough to make the right decisions and say that it's all about you. As long as you are happy, as long as you are you think that there's a purpose, the look does not matter that much. Yes, media plays a role, but I think with so much social media and so much scrutiny around, media has to is playing a bit safe as well, because they know that if you talk about something, you can get answered or
Yeah.
questioned about why. And even talking about female bodies or all of that. So I think as long as we sort of know what's good for us,
Yeah.
it might be good for someone else, but it might not be good for us. I think if we have sort of draw that line in between, it's definitely can be used in a very good way.
Absolutely. Thanks, Buddha. Thank you. On that note, a relatively similar question is, in your experience, is the fashion industry racist?
Oh, I think that's a very blunt question. I
Okay.
think I think it's I wouldn't say racist. I
Mhm.
think it takes them time to accept you. I think to give in their favor, saying that, I always believe everyone in Australia, if I'm only talking about Australia, is we all of us are migrants.
Right.
Some of them probably came 80 years ago, some of them probably came 100 years ago, but we all came to this country from, it's an island, we all came from different countries, right? We all came from somewhere. Yes, my husband's fifth generation Indian Australian.
Mhm.
He's one of the first Indian families to settle in Australia, but people still ask him this question, so when did you come to Australia?
Right.
His mom was born here. His great granddad moved to Australia in I don't even remember the year, but many years ago, almost 100 and odd,
Wow.
10, 15 years ago. My kids are almost sixth generation, so it's a uh, um, I wouldn't say racist, but I think it takes them time to accept it, especially if you come from a background where they think, oh, it's not something you're like, if you're a doctor and you're an Indian, they will openly accept you because it's like it's in their system
No,
that,
not accepted. No. Yeah.
you are accepted as a doctor because they're like, oh, that's what Indians do. They're massive being in doctors. Or but when it comes to fashion, and it's not only about designers, I think, because I think I'm at a position where when I did Australian Fashion Week, I had all sorts of people I was directing, that okay, this is how I want to do it. I was the one making the decisions. But then, for example, the models, they feel that a lot of them still don't have that agencies representing them. So there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work for sort of all around. I, as a designer, can lead in certain ways, but I really wanted to have a lot more South Asians in my runway. I had few, but then the problem was, you are sort of tied up by agencies. So
Yeah.
when you're tied up by agencies, what do? The agencies don't represent certain. So then what do you? So do you? And then it's very high risk if you go. It's a very world level fashion runway.
Yeah.
It's not something you're doing it in a garage, or it doesn't matter if somebody doesn't turn up. Every minute is counted for, who comes out when the music stops. So if you have one missing piece of puzzle, the whole thing can crumble. So
Yeah.
you really, it's a very high risk environment where you really have to be, you have to have other parties involved where, contracts are signed, you sign a contract for every single model who comes on the runway. So it's quite technical. Then, when you see it on you think, oh, it's, you've literally had 30 beautiful women wearing clothes walking out, but there's every show you really have, you employ close to, if not less, I would say minimum of 100 people to make that thing happen. So it is quite intense. But to answer your question, I think my advice, and I think what I think how I have done it is, do the right thing, do your research. I think work for your client, make things for your clients, and I'm talking especially purely in a fashion sense. That do it like I always design for my Mastani women. I say this is my customer. I think if you know who you are doing it for, there is no stopping. And have right people in your team who can guide you, have the right mentor to tell you what, this is how it's done. Because, no matter where we come from, if we are living in a country which is, not India, you have to live and you have to respect their rules and you have to follow what they want you to do. I think the problem is where, I think you have to be very sophisticated in what ways you're doing things. So I think for me, I really wanted to showcase India in that way. I really wanted that, this is the real India. This is the in today's India. So yeah, I haven't faced racism, but probably I shouldn't say I haven't, in probably very underlined, where, but I think, like I said, I was at a position where I was the one making decisions. I've worked really hard to get where I am. And then, I think if there is someone who's trying to put you down, like I said, if you've done your research right, like, you really know what you're doing.
Exactly.
So yeah, I wouldn't say, when I came here as a student, I was, it was that time when there were a lot of talks about Australia being quite racist, and my parents are worried. They were like, "Oh, what are you gonna do?"
Yeah.
There's all these things going on, and they had this big Federation Square drama happening. But all through uni, I went to the University of Melbourne. I did my architecture from there. I never felt it. I never felt, that I was cornered, or I was not, accepted, or there was something's wrong with me. You have to put your point out. You have to sort of raise your voice if you think it's concerning. But yeah, we are no less than anyone else. I think when you have that in your mindset and you think that, just because I'm brown and you're white, that doesn't mean. I think it's a privilege.
Just take it in your stride.
That's it. Yes.
Kudrat, I'm mindful of time. Just one question is, you spoke about mental health earlier, and that is something even I'm very passionate about. So on a difficult day, you said you have children, you are the brand owner, and all of the things happening. How do you take care of your mental health when things are not going the way you planned them out to be?
I think as when I was growing up, I was very passionate about what I was doing and what I'm doing, but I was never in the rat race. I think that what keeps my mental health really intact. I have winkers. I always say I am walking in my own path. I've got my own destination. I've got my own goals. I'm not in a rush. A lot of times you get asked, especially after the show, I was like, so what's happening next? What's the big thing? What's this? And I'm a person who really goes with the flow. I work hard, but I don't let that come to my, personally. I try to balance out my life, with my kids, with making myself available to them, or if I'm traveling for work. I'm very spiritual, so I think that really helps me, and I think that's something I think is such a big positive growing up in a country like India, that you are sort of it's in our system, and I really do my 10 minutes, 15 minutes of meditation, whatever I can every morning. And I think have a belief that everything is being taken care of. I'm a God's child and everything's being taken care of. And I think when you have that, and it's part of life, when you believe that things will go up and down, we will all have good times, bad times. You always, in that age, your parents are growing old,
Yeah.
and you're like, you suddenly become an adult and you're like, oh, I'm adulting now. Okay, I have to, like, go to funerals. And I'm like, I don't even know what to say to anyone. So, it's just, I think, part of your life. You really have to, if something goes wrong, I always believe that, I get that strength to sort of get past it. And I spend time for myself. I look after myself. I would switch off, and I, take out time for myself, which I think as humans, and especially as women, we forget, because
Yeah.
we are doing something for someone all the time.
Yeah.
So, once a week, I just go by myself and have a breakfast in the morning, just by myself. And I think that's something which, I look forward to every week, because all I do is just sit there, look around, and, just eat breakfast by myself. And I think it's something you want to sort of stop and think and, like, be appreciate. I think appreciate what you have. When you look at these people who don't have food, water, and I keep telling that to my kids. I'm like, what? Eat your dinner. You're not eating your dinner. There are people who don't have food, and growing up, we have seen all of that around us. So I think appreciating, we are in this beautiful country, and it's giving us and given us so much, and to be happy and live each day on its own, rather than thinking. I don't think about the future too much. Whatever happens, we'll see. I'm very bindas that way, and I think I take, I go day by day and just try and enjoy and make everyone happy around me. That's my purpose.
Beautiful, Anuja. Thank you. On that note, what would be your message to our listeners? For example, say any young girl or any young man is listening to us one day in a time. What would you like to tell them?
I think my advice, especially to the South Asians, which I have felt, the young kids, is don't think about getting famous or getting richer, or shortcuts. I think that's the only advice. Hard work is a key to everything, and doing anything you do in your life or in your workspace, I think if you do it with passion, it will give you beautiful results. If your purpose is right, don't rush or run behind things. Educate yourself, sort of do your research, and yeah, take decisions based on how you want to sort of spend the rest of your life, rather than short term,
Yeah.
quick results. I think that's where I feel this young generation is sort of like, okay, looking at social media, or this person is going on a private jet. What do I do to get on there? I mean, if that's your purpose, you can, but you have to work really hard to get there. But otherwise, I think if your mental health is right, like, I'm very passionate about it. If you are, looking after yourself, there's look after your health. There's nothing more than that. Yeah, just be happy and sort of work towards your goals.
Absolutely. And Kudrat, if anyone wants to look you up on social media, where can they find you?
Okay, so I am private on my social media, my page, but I there's stuff about me everywhere now. Apparently after AFW, and that's my nephew who's 18-year-old. He keeps googling me all the time, and he tells me, you know what, this is what is happening, Masi. Now you're on here, and I'm not a big fan of social media that way, but our my brand's page Mastani.Label is on Instagram and on Facebook, and I do sometimes make appearances there. Otherwise, yeah, I am, very open. And, if anybody ever needs an advice, you're more than welcome to put my email out.
Yeah.
If there's, I'm always happy to mentor and, help anyone who is wanting or trying to get into the field.
Thank you, Kudrat. Thank you so much. That was lovely speaking with you. On that note, to my listeners, if you've heard me for the first time, this was a very insightful, wonderful conversation, which we spoke about a lot of things. We spoke about fashion, sustainable fashion, mental health, taking care of ourselves. And if anyone wants to be mentored or they want any help, please reach out to Kudrat. And if you've heard me for a while, I really hope that you like the content that I put on the table. If you've got any thoughts or feedback, please reach out to me on Awaz-e-Haqiqat@gmail.com, or you can also find me on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram as Awaz-e-Haqiqat as well. Thank you, Kudu. Thank you so much for joining me on a Friday evening. We wish you all the best, and I hope we can have many more of these relevant conversations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.